Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Powerful Man Show. I am your host, Doug Holt, with my special guest, Franco Burrows. Franco, good to have you again, brother.
Great to see you again, Doug.
It's always a pleasure. So, Franco, for those that aren't aware, obviously Tim is out and Franco is in. Franco, amongst other things, is a coach. He's also one of our advisors. So, for a lot of the men that are interested in the program, Franco may be one of the guys that you talk to. The Powerful Man, it's a little different. You usually talk to one of our alumni like Franco. These are guys that have raised their hand, have had an amazing journey with us, and have continued on. And Franco has been involved in the movement for a number of years. One of Franco's many strengths, and there's a lot of them here, so I don't want your head to get too big, Franco, but is around the inner dynamics of masculine and feminine energy, men and women, and how we interact. And Franco, you brought up a great conversation topic to the table. And it was all about, guys, what happens when your wife's friends become an issue for you. So, Franco, set the scene for us, and let's have a conversation about it.
Yeah, well, there's a number of men in the free Facebook community who are having issues with their wives, girlfriends, and their friend circle, who are not necessarily a good influence on them. Sometimes, they are, but it's helping men know how to manage that and how to navigate all that. Know where the line is. I think a lot of men don't want to be the bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, like the last thing you want to do is piss off, your wife's friends and all that. And we don't want to help men get into those problems either. But so it's more about how men know where the line is, and to set things up in a way where their friends and their wife's friends and their friendship circle actually support the relationship.
Yeah, what's interesting about this conversation topic is it brings me back to when my wife and I first got married and we first started having marital problems. One of the things that both of us sat down and talked about and realized when we had one of our breakthrough conversations was the people that we were hanging out with. And what was I really believe that you are the product of the 5 or maybe it's 6 people, the people you spend the most time with. You're the product of that. And studies have shown that your income is going to be around the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Your health and fitness is going to be around the average of the people you spend the most time with. And so your marital situation is going to be similar. And so when my wife and I were going through these problems, Franco, what we noticed were a lot of the girlfriends she was spending time with were divorced single women or just single women in general. And it was really kind of one of those aha moments. Now, and I can't say too much because the men that I started gravitating towards during this time were single guys who were out on the prowl. These are guys who are out there hunting their next kill, so to speak. So it's really a great topic to be bringing up. And as this has gone through with the Powerful Man, I've seen this play out so many times.
Yeah, well, I like to think of it as something that brings it home for a lot of men is when your relationship hits a problem, right? If you land on the rocks, who are you going to call? Who is she going to call? And who are you going to call? Are you going to be calling people in your friendship circle that want not only the best for you? That's the first thing. Do they want the best for you? Okay. And then do they want the best for her as well? Okay. Do they want the best for the relationship? Or are they just going to say, forget her, blah, 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 And then the other side of the coin is she going to have friends who are going to support her in the same way and you in the same way? Because that's the idea. I mean, look, I'm not perfect, but one thing I've had in the past is my friends have said to me that they've gone back to their wives or their girlfriends and they've said, when you spend time with Franco, you always come back and treat me better, or you come back in a good mood and you've got a good energy about you. It doesn't always happen, but like that's the ideal, isn't it? You know what I mean?
Yep.
That's the ideal where either indirectly, just by having a good time, and it's just it doesn't. I think your girlfriend or your wife's girlfriends, they don't have to think you sort of walk on water or anything. But that's the first thing: is do they support your relationship? Have they got similar values? So, like you say, are they in that stage of life where they're single, they're divorced? Do they all hate men? Because they're
Yep.
all yeah. And then I think you could maybe go into more specifics. So, like, do you have similar life goals, values? Because they could be really big into relationships, right? Which is a good one, but they could have completely different values to you. You know, you know. So we speak to some guys where they're buying the cars, they're doing all the holidays, they're having an extension on the house, they're having everything done to keep up with their friends. And it's like, well, is that friendship group a good influence on your marriage? I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
Oh yeah, no, I love. I'm just listening to you, and you bringing up so many stories and side stories that I want to share. You know how it goes, Franco, for the men that we work with, and it's the advantage that we have working with thousands of men over time. But when you think about this, and who are your wife's 5 closest friends? And the questions I would ask myself, guys, are who are they? Can you name them, first of all? And if you can't, that's a signal that you're not in your wife's world, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of guys listening to this are going, crap, I don't even know, right? The second question is, what, are you friendly with them? Doesn't mean you have to be friends with them, but are you friendly with them? Because that's telling too. Because I can promise you, everybody that listens to the show knows my wife coaches women, right? Married women. So I get the other side of the story all the time from her. And these women talk all the time. They're texting all day. They're on Instagram, DMing each other. They're sharing photos. They're on Voxer. They're in constant communication with each other. So they know the problems in your marriage, right? And they're either going to help guide your partner, your wife, or they're going to help guide your partner. They're either going to help them go say, hey, look, here's another angle to look at this and support her and your marriage, as you said, the third entity. Or they're going to be like, hey, forget him. Let's go out and get some drinks tonight. Let's go out in town. Or, I know these people, this party we can go to, et cetera, which happens to a lot of the men. Their women just say, forget this. I'm going to go have a social life. And they start hanging out with these women, right? And it's not these women. I'm not saying these women like it's their fault. But what tends to happen, Franco, that I see is a lot of the men don't really know their wife's friends, who they are, what they're about. And what you said, I think, is probably the most poignant is what are their values? What's their value systems? Do they honor the sanctity of marriage? Yes or no? Do they, really believe in, the betterment of your family? Or are they just looking for someone to go out and get drinks with? Right? What stage of their progression are they in? I think that's really important to know.
Yeah, I think the values, the setup that they're all in with their own relationships. Another one is, how would I put this? I think it's accountability. I would like to think that and it's something that we all do for each other at the Powerful Man. And it's one of the things I love about the Powerful Man. We don't get involved in the gender war. And, if a guy comes in and he's got to blow off some steam about his wife or whatever, we're all about, okay, now what are you going to do about it? It's helping him take responsibility for his side of the street, cleaning up his side of the street, making sure he's right, making sure he's done everything he can to step up for her, to connect with her, to lead her. And then really the ideal is that she's got friends who are doing that for her. Now, my take on this is that it's just the nature of feminine energy that they don't necessarily do that for each other. Women don't necessarily call each other out. And that's okay. That's not necessarily a problem. But I think it's a conversation worth having with your woman, that you highlight that. It's just like, I would even recommend to men to say, look, when the shit hits the fan between us, and it will, who are you going to call? I would actually get it out on the table and say, who are you going to call? Because this is our marriage, or this is our relationship. This is our family. We've got kids involved for a lot of men. Who are you going to call? Right. And then hopefully she can then see that if she doesn't have enough people that are going to fight for the right, the good, the greater good of the relationship, that could be a problem, you know. And I would say it could be her dad, it could be, but you also want the other male figures in her life, like her dad, if he's alive, and whoever else, maybe a brother or someone who will provide that sounding board for her and that accountability for her.
Yep. I totally agree. And in another podcast, we'll get into male friends getting in her life. Yeah. But right now, let's stick to the women.
Yeah.
And so something I've done, Franco, my wife has done as well. Well, first of all, we've actively sought out, as we've moved around the world together, couples that have similar values, right? It doesn't have to be, for us, it doesn't have to be religiously focused, but the core values of what we believe it means to have a great marriage, or working on one. There's no perfect marriage. And what I'll do, which might help some of the guys that I did early on, is I really watered the relationships my wife had with girlfriends that I thought were honoring us. And what I mean by that is, so you get invited to the Saturday barbecue, right, over to people's backyard house. And what I started to notice, and I started to quickly, as guys, we're problem solvers, right? So I started to quickly categorize these women into ones that I thought were supportive of us as a couple and ones that weren't. So when I got invited to the barbecues, which could be really fun, of the ones who were not supported, I would discourage showing up and then lean us towards going to the barbecue or whatever, the get together, the people who are supportive. And I would really foster that relationship with those women and the people that were in their world, right? So if they had a significant other, I would invest into that relationship as well, because of what we're talking about here. Because if we do agree, and guys, you listening to this, that you're the product of the 5 people you spend the most time with, men that are involved in this movement we call the powerful man, you're surrounded by a lot of really powerful guys, right, that are out here to better themselves, men like Franco. And so you're in a great environment. Your woman might not be. And so you really want to make sure that you are, I call it watering, but you're nurturing the relationships and or creating opportunities for new relationships, which is something I did for my wife, with women who I thought did have those values and were still cool and fun to hang out with and what have you. But what I thought would support us in our ultimate goals in our marriage.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, did you do that directly or indirectly with your wife? Or did you just sort of steer it in a certain direction without getting it all on the table?
Both. I have my moments where I would just say things, quite honestly, especially early on, where if there was one of the friends that, I didn't think was worthy, I made it known, right, that my opinion of her was such. And I think, Franco, I've studied persuasion quite a bit, so I can make some persuasive arguments as to why this person wasn't developing her, my wife, or supporting her in a good way, whereas another woman might be supporting, and be as fun. And that was one of the issues, right? Because my wife had so much history with some people. And not to say any of my wife's friends were issues, because there really weren't. It was just, they were in that mentality. They weren't actively trying to ruin our marriage, but let's be, if I'm hanging out with you and 4 other guys all the time who are out, because Franco, you happen to be a single man at the moment, I believe. If you guys are out there meeting women all the time and that's who I'm hanging out with, you start to get caught up in that energy, right? It starts to be a fun thing. And so I could easily get swept up in the mentality of going out to clubs and bars or wherever you youngsters go these days. No, going out and meeting beautiful women. And I happen to know that you're very good at it. So, I could easily get swept up in that. Now, the difference between that analogy is Franco's, you're able to switch hats a million times, right? Like you said, you're able to go out with your friends who are married and they come home and their wives are like, wow, you're a better man spending some time with Franco. So what we want to do is find the Francos of the world, the women Francos, the female Francos that for our wives and our partners.
Yeah. I remember, I was in a relationship where we, like a lot of the men that come to us, I'd put everything into business, totally to her. And that was my mistake. You know what I mean? I just didn't know what I was doing. Um, she had this dream to buy a new house, do it all up from scratch. That was her dream, and that was her. She put, and we both knew that it was. We both came to a point that we realized, shit, we didn't nurture the relationship yet. And what was interesting was one of her friends said, it was that point where I knew that she wasn't getting the accountability from some of her friends that she maybe needed.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you want is not someone who's going to say, oh yeah, just take a load of crap off him and whatever else. We're not asking for that. What we are expecting is that someone will say, hey, maybe you should put that aside for now and focus on your relationship. So yeah, I think that's a really big one. It's interesting to get your stories on that and the perspective of how you set it up. So we've had a guy who had a similar situation to you in the Brotherhood, I think it was, and he did the same. That's why I asked you the question, because what he did was he just gradually steered them away to different people.
Yeah.
He just sort of like, actually, you've been invited to out on this boat with all your friends and this, that, and the other. And they're all massively into drinking and whatever. And he was just like, you know what, that weekend, I can't go, but we are free this weekend. And he was very proactive about setting up something that he wanted to do with the type of people he wanted to spend some time with,
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what you want. Because there's a couple things here, right? One, I'll use this guy because it's easier to talk about somebody else than myself. One is now he's leading the relationship, which is sexy for a woman, right? She may be bummed out about the boat and that's her friends, and that's totally understandable. But now he's leading and saying, we can't make it, but I've got these other fun things to do. And what I would do as an example is I would ensure my wife was as comfortable as possible in those situations. So for a woman, I would prep her on kind of the other women that are going to be there, right? Tell her some stories. My wife's gluten-free, so I might, go out and get a 6-pack of gluten-free beer to make sure, everything, like, there's nothing for her to worry about. And then I would make the funny, warm introduction. The way I do it is, me, Franco, I'm very self-deprecating in those situations. So I'd make fun of myself and let the women chat, and just really make it an easy, flowy entrance for my wife. And it sounds, I'm sure this guy did too. And then also what I would focus on, guys, is making sure those events you plan are things your wife is really excited about. Yes. So maybe a concert she wants to go to. I just happen to know that Franco and his girlfriend or his wife are coming too. So they're going to join us. Let me tell you about Franco, right? And you have it planned out and you make it just a really fun, easy event. And now I'm having a great time with my buddy Franco. His girl I know is going to be amazing because Franco is amazing, and my wife and her are going to get along. Now, it doesn't always work where both couples just, everybody loves each other and has a great time, but you start building that energy, that synergy going through there. And what my wife and I deliberately did, guys, because we had this conversation eventually, and that's where if you can get into this agreement, right? Hey, we got married and we had these vows, we had this dream, and maybe it's falling apart, and I get it, and it's tough. It's not easy. But babe, if you want to do this, if we want to build this together, right? Maybe it's going through the church. Maybe it is, right? A lot of people do that. And most people I know that go to the church, they do it for the community of the church, right? Because you kind of know people have a base value system, or they're at least trying to get there, right? But you start inviting people over to a barbecue and you introduce them. So I'm a big kid, Franco, no surprise to you, but for everybody else. And so recently we did this, my wife and I did it consciously, where we invited probably a dozen couples and their families over during COVID. And I'm out there setting up games, our whole backyard. We have like an acre. I got games everywhere. I got music going, like 80s music, and just the whole vibe, barbecues, drinks, different stations, and then just going around introducing people and letting them mingle and get to know each other. And so you start to form your own tribe, because we just moved to a new area. You start to form your own tribe, and you let the people in that tribe know what's important to you, because those conversations happen. And obviously being involved in the Powerful Man, people ask, what are you interested in? I explain what the Powerful Man is. And then I let the husbands know and the wives know that, our marriages and our family is a key importance for us. And the ones that have that same belief system, we're going to rally around them, and they're going to rally around us, because everybody goes through hard times, everybody. And the more support you have and the more proactive you are about getting that support, the better.
Yeah. And as the man, you get to lead. You get to be the one who keeps his finger on the pulse. And obviously you want her to play her role as well.
Sure.
But I would say for the men, it's really your job to make sure that the vibe is where you want it to be. And if it's drifting off, to find a way to pull it back,
Yeah. Well, one of the cool things I'll add to that, and maybe I'm wrong in doing so, but this is what's worked for me. So it's the exact situation. We moved to a new area. We bought a house. We've been here a little over a year, but it's a friggin' pandemic, right? Hard to meet people during a pandemic when you're not supposed to go out and talk to anybody. So we have this barbecue, like I mentioned to you. And I really did this last year and brought these couples together. Well, my wife hit it off with several of the women. I knew they're solid. I now let her take charge because they're talking every day. I talk to the husbands every once in a while when I see them. It's great, etc. But my wife's chatting with them every single day. And so now I can release the reins with those things, but I still take the frame, but I let her build upon these relationships, and I just nurture it, because that's what I want as a man. I want to be able to be here working at times, talking to you, Franco, talking to the men, and then also know my wife is having a good time, living her best life with solid women. An example is she went out, and this might resonate with you guys. My wife went out to an area around us, and they went basically drinking all day. Right? There's these cycle bikes, 6 people on a bike, and they go from pub to pub type situation. And when my wife comes back, I was like, how was it? Well, her and this one woman who's in the family, they broke away from the trip because the other girls didn't share the same values.
Right. They were all going bananas, were they?
Going bananas, actually getting in fights, a couple of, looking up for men, and they peeled away.
Yeah.
Right. Because they now had this bond and they had shared values, they were still able to have an amazing time. I didn't worry about it. My wife's having a great time. Right. But the shared values kept them in common. And these women were able to break away, go have some wine by themselves, and had a great time. I mean, an amazing time. And I share this with you because I know so many men out there, their wives are gone for days and nights and weekends with single women. And it's not even married women, and they're not honoring their marriage. They're not honoring the sanctity that's there, right? When they go out, it's more like a group of guys going to Vegas for a bachelor party, right? It's just, what happens, Vegas stays in Vegas. It never does. And so you want to foster this, guys. And when you do that, you can have such a being where your wife can go out, have an amazing time with other amazing women, right? Doesn't mean that they have to all be conservative or whatever it may be. They're still going to have a great time. But once they have that shared value system and they're protecting the sanctity of your marriage, they're going to start to grow and build. I think that's why a lot of the men that come through our programs, their wives end up doing some sort of program like this or coaching, because they see the value in it and they start to develop. And men that are in the brotherhood, some of them have been in there for 3 years or more, the inner circle. These are our 1-year mastermind group programs, or going through the activation method. Now they're surrounded by not 5 guys that are amazing, but hundreds of men who are lifting them up consistently. It makes a big difference.
Just reminded me of a friend who is married and is actually in a great marriage. But they had some rocky periods, and I was involved in. He used to confide in me, and his wife used to get visits from friends from another part of the country where she's from, and her friends would start moaning about their husbands. And what his wife would do then, my friend's wife, was she would just all of a sudden go, yeah, you know what? He does the same thing. And even though he didn't really do it, the way women really get in rapport with each other. And all of a sudden, he was just like, what is going on? What's she talking about? And And then the next day he was like, what was all that about? And she was like, oh, I don't know. I just got into it with that. It was just like, it's amazing how, if, like you say, if she's not doing a lot of work on herself, your wife or your partner or whoever, then you are going to have to be vigilant with this stuff, especially when drink is involved and especially when other people are involved. So
it's exactly it. So guys, let's leave these guys with a few action steps here, Franco. And then guys, next podcast, we'll talk about male friends and what's going on there. So a couple things to do. First thing I'll throw out there, Franco, if that's okay, if I'll take the first lead here, is guys, I want you to write it down, type it in your phone, whatever you do, but you have to do some physical action here. What are the names, bonus points if you get last names, of your wife's 5 closest friends? Not just the best friend from high school, but the people that she stays in contact with the most, right? The 5 people around her, the women only. And if you can't answer this is the caveat here, guys, and it's okay if you can't, but that's a sign right now that, there's an issue here and there's something you want to check in with right away. What else can they do, Franco?
Well, I love that point. And I would add into that point that is, say she's got 5 friends she's close to, maybe not rank them to who she's closest to, because she might be close in different ways to different women. So she's close in this way to this woman, and they might all be part of the same circle, or they might be all different, different combinations of different circles of friends. And that's important because then you'll know how those women are influencing your wife or your partner.
Yep. Yeah. I love that. And that's really interesting here. And the third thing, guys, I think we'll throw in there, and we'll leave you guys with this because I want you guys to take action. I don't want to give you too much here, is have a conversation with your wife, right? Have a conversation about your wife and ask her if she feels your relationship is important. And thus, does she feel that her friends hold your relationship in a high regard? And I'm throwing an extra one here, Franco, and ask her if she believes that your friends, gentlemen, hold your relationship in a high regard. You may get some surprise answers here.
It's important to get it all on the table, isn't it?
It's really important to get it all on the table. And I'll tell you what, my wife, when I asked her this is many years ago, there are a couple names that came up of guys that I was hanging out with that she wasn't too fond of. And I defended them, but I'm going to be honest. She was right. She was right.
No, I've had the same thing. My partner has pulled me up on definitely one friend, and I did the same thing. I defended, but time told me and her that she was right.
Yep. Yeah, it's amazing insight we have when women tend to be a little bit more intuitive, like obviously bell-shaped curve type stuff, but they're seeing it. And if they're seeing it, they're wondering why you maintain these character traits this person has that creates women. So Franco, as always, it's so exciting to have you on here. We got to get you on the show more often. Guys love hearing from you. Guys, if you want to talk to Franco or get a chance to get to know Franco better, go over to the Powerful Man Facebook group. It's a great place. Franco is the man in there. He's kind of the community leader, mayor of sorts, always answering questions, giving contributions to the men. Franco is also a coach and one of the guys that raises his hand to jump on a phone call with the guys that are interested in the Activation Method program. An absolute gem of a guy, I'll say. And look forward to seeing you in person again, Franco. Gentlemen, as always, take massive action. So do those exercises. Rewind this, go back, write it down. Who are the 5 friends, right? Are they holding the sanctity of your relationship highly, right? And also, when you look at these 5 friends, rank them in order, as Franco said, that's really important. And then have a conversation with your wife. Gentlemen, until next time, we'll see you on the Powerful Man Show.